Hi, my name is Elin Björling. I'm at the University of Washington, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the spectrum of mental health. So often we think about the stigma of mental illness, and we think about people as being either mentally ill or mentally healthy. And actually, this is really faulty thinking. Because this kind of binary idea of being either unhealthy or healthy is really not how people experience mental health and mental illness. So, in the larger spectrum of mental illness, and this is important to consider, many of us have had an experience of mental illness at some point in our lifetime by the time we're adults. And currently, 46.4% of adults have experienced a mental illness in their lifetime. So that's roughly half of adults. And then 5% of adults will experience a mental illness in this next year. So if you haven't experienced it previously, in this next year, 5% of us are likely to have a mental health sort of crisis or just an experience or difficulty with anxiety, depression, all these things that aren't uncommon at all. However, the youngest of us are the ones who are most vulnerable, and half of all mental health disorders begin by age 14. And by 24, 3/4 of mental illness have begun. So the 14 to sort of 24 age range is a really vulnerable time for a number of different reasons, but that's where we are most vulnerable, and that's why it's important to pay attention to this particular population at this age. And what's really striking, and I predict these numbers are going to be more dramatic in the coming years, but only 41% of people who've had a mental disorder have been able to receive professional health care for that mental health disorder. So this means that we have most people with a mental health issue not receiving any care or treatment. So a lot of us are trying to manage on our own, either through self-care or looking to our communities for support and so forth, but not getting professional support. And there's a whole host of reasons about why that is, but it is definitely true. And a lot of it's a lack of access to care and to providers and to appropriate clinicians. So going back to this idea about whether we are mentally healthy or mentally ill, it's important that to understand that your mental health status, whether someone or you consider yourself mentally healthy or mentally ill, is not necessarily who you are, but rather it's how you're doing with the world around you, the challenges that life is putting in front of you right now. Has very much to do with your mental health and how you're able to handle the conditions that you're in. So with the right supports, with a lot of support from communities and families and people around you, someone who even has been diagnosed with severe mental illness can be incredibly mentally healthy. So if my needs are getting met and I have the supports in place that I need, whether that be medication or therapy or various different tools in daily living, if I have the right supports, I can be incredibly mentally healthy, even if I have a mental illness. Similarly, someone with strong mental health overall, maybe haven't experienced a mental illness at any point in their lifetime, can experience a life event or a situation that immediately leads to a serious mental illness for them. So again, it's that balance of having the supports you need to help you manage what life is putting in front of you that really makes this difference. It's not so much about the individual's ability. Each of us at some point has a breaking point where mental illness may show up because we're unable to manage the complexities of what's happening in our life at the time. So that comes back to this larger idea that it's good for us to start maybe mentally healthy for us to start thinking about mental health on a spectrum rather than individuals who are healthy or unhealthy. And so when we take this idea of mental health as a spectrum, the spectrum goes from healthy to unwell for every single person, regardless of what other issues they have at play. So somebody with a mental illness will require more supports to be on the healthy end of the spectrum, but it's still very feasible and possible. So someone could go from healthy to really struggling because of a major life event that was unexpected or extremely difficult to handle. And at the same time, someone else could go from struggling and being mentally unwell. Maybe they're not finding the right medication, or maybe they're not, they don't have access to a therapist or a counselor. And as soon as you add those supports in place, they can very quickly become mentally healthy. So this spectrum represents the possibility for every single person, and that it's not a binary healthy or unhealthy issue. It's really a spectrum of supports and resources and connections that allow us to be healthy. And that's true for every single person, regardless of where they're starting from. So in summary, this really just means that if we start to recognize that we all are existing on this spectrum of mental health, then we understand that mental health is possible for everyone. And that a lot of little supports in little ways can make huge differences in terms of mental health. So yes, therapy and sometimes medication are really important, but also community and schools and teachers and family members can be incredibly important on our paths to mental health. So that is the spectrum of mental health, and hopefully that gives you some things to think about going forward in terms of your own mental health and the mental health of those around you and how we may better support each other. Thank you.